Hey, what's up guys? I'm Shaylin, the guitar instructor and founder of Worship Online. Today we're going to be taking a look at some gear, and more specifically, we're going to be looking at a stereo electric guitar setup. If you've ever watched guitar players from bands like Hillsong, Bethel, Jesus Culture, or pretty much any notable band, they're all using a stereo rig. If you don't know what a stereo rig is, it's basically using two guitar amps to create a wide stereo sound, rather than just using one that gives you a one-channel mono sound right up the middle. If that still doesn't make sense, don't worry, we're going to be covering all of that and more. We split this video into two parts. In this part, we're going to be covering why you would want to be playing in stereo and go over some of the technical reasons why guitar players use two amps. In part two, we're going to be taking a closer look at the gear and some pedal board settings. If you're pretty familiar with the stereo setup and you just want to see and hear some gear, you can find that in part two, and the link for that is below. So let's get started. Okay, so for this part, I'm actually going to pull up the mixer and Logic on my computer so we can kind of A/B some stereo sounds and mono sounds and let you guys hear the difference. But first, I kind of wanted to give you a quick explanation of what exactly stereo is if you don't know. So basically, whenever you hear something, we have a left ear and a right ear, obviously. So we hear things coming from our left side over here if someone's talking, and then if someone's talking over here, I hear something coming from my right ear. And it's actually, we actually hear in surround sound. So what stereo is, it tries to replicate that even whenever something is coming out of like a device like your phone, whether you know it or not, it's not only one channel coming out of there, it's two channels. We have a left channel and a right channel coming out. So when we hear headphones, we can hear some instruments are played on our left side and some are on our right side. We don't have the exact same thing playing in both. If we did, that would be what we call mono. We have stereo. So whenever we use stereo guitar amps, we have a left amp and a right amp. One's panned to the far left and one's panned to the far right. So what we're doing is we're trying to replicate the way we actually hear instead of just everything coming right down the middle. So we have different sounds coming from the left and different sounds coming to the right, which gives us what we would call a wide sound instead of it just coming right up from the middle. Alright guys, so what I have here is just a basic Logic session, and I'm going to be using it to go through some examples of how stereo works and how it fits into a mix and how it gives you a large, wide sound. So our first example here is I've taken a small clip from One Thing Remains by Bethel, and so obviously this song was recorded in stereo, so it's a really large, wide sound. Some instruments are panned, they're obviously tracking guitars with 2 amps stereo sound, so it just has a really large, wide sound. So I know we're talking about electric guitars here, but I thought it was important to show just an overall mix and what the difference between stereo and mono. So I'm just going to play a clip of it in stereo and the way it's supposed to sound and let you hear it, and then we're going to go to mono and let you hear the difference. So here it is in stereo. And see, that's how it's supposed to sound, really wide and large. Now I'm going to flip it to mono and let you hear the same thing and see if you can tell the difference. And now obviously that's lacking a good bit. And so the way this works is now that we're in mono, everything is coming right down the center. Everything that's happening in your left ear is the exact same thing that's happening in your right ear. Nothing is panned, nothing is different, so it gives you a very centered sound, which isn't how we want it to sound. We want it to sound wide. So I'm going to just kind of go back and forth as we're playing through this and let you just hear the difference as I A/B it. So this is stereo, and then I'm going to flip to mono. Here's mono. Go back to stereo. Back to mono. So you can obviously hear the huge difference that playing in stereo or a mono sound can have on your set. Okay, so how does this apply to electric guitar? Whenever we're playing electric guitar in stereo, what we're doing is we're using two different guitar amps. We have like a stereo pedal, a delay, or a reverb, and it has two outputs on it, each running to a separate amp. So you might be thinking, okay, well, we're playing the same thing on two different amps. Won't that just sound exactly the same? But actually, that's not true. Each amp has its own unique sound, whether the tone is different. And then whenever you add delays and reverbs that give it even a bigger stereo sound, it's going to send just a little bit different signal to each amp, making them sound separately. So the way we achieve this is, say this is my 2 guitar tracks, and they are. We pre-recorded some guitar here, and this amp right here, electric left, we pan this one all the way to the left, and then electric right, we pan this one all the way to the right. And whenever your mixer is mixing for you your electric guitars, he's going to do the same thing. He's going to pan the guitars opposite of each other. And so let's just take a listen to these guitars, and it's the exact same thing, but it's just each amp is panned opposite of each other. So let's take a listen. See, with that, we have a really large and wide sound. So what I'm going to do here is I have the same thing on this track, electric both, and this is just using if it was in mono. So these were stereo, opposites of each other, and then this is if we were in mono, and essentially what it would sound like if we were only using one guitar amp. So as you can tell, that's lacking quite a bit compared to the large stereo sound that these other 2 amps are making while they're panned. They're the exact same thing, but one's in stereo and the other's in mono. Now let's listen to it again in stereo, and we'll go back and forth so we can really tell the difference. And then this is mono. And back to stereo. So it just gives us a large, wide sound, and it really sounds really cool, especially when you're doing some swells or something like that. It really fills up the mix. And so our last example here would also be a great tip if you're recording your own tracks or tracking electric guitar somewhere. So I've taken the guitar tracks, a rhythm guitar track from Rooftops by Jesus Culture. I'm just going to let us kind of listen through it, and you can hear how it's very wide in stereo. So it goes from mono, pan to the right side, and then when it gets to the big chorus, they're going to flip to a big stereo sound here. So I'll just play this for you. And those guitars actually sound incredible. So what they did actually with this, instead of using stereo amps, they just double tracked it. So they have a completely different track going here on the left side as they do on the right side, and they just added them together. So it's actually 2 different guitar tracks together to make one. And so what we're doing with our stereo amp setup is essentially trying to create that sound. Obviously we can't have 5 guitar players each panned and playing the exact same thing to create a really wide sound, so we're only 1 guitar player. So what we're gonna be doing is using stereo amps to achieve that wide sound with only 1 person. So again, I'll let us listen through that. It goes through this mono, and see if you can hear how the guitars are separate from each other. And see if I pan this to the left, you can hear 1. And then pan it to the right, it's a completely separate guitar. Which you can't even tell it's that way when it's right up and down the middle. So that's essentially how stereo works. We're trying to create a wide sound that sounds a lot like, whenever we're listening to something in real life, like left and right, and creating that so people can hear it that way. So that's essentially how stereo works with electric guitar. Now, stereo can be applied to many different instruments, like keyboards to create a wide sound, and even drums where they panned some of the mics to the left and they pan some of the mics to the right, and leave some of them, like the kick and the snare, right down the middle, and it creates a really large, wide sound. Now, in part 2, we're going to be taking a closer look at a stereo electric guitar rig. We're going to take a look at some amps and how they're panned, and look at a whole pedal board setup, and some of the delay settings that are used to create some of these sounds and textures, and even some swells and different worship sounds. So click below to get the link to part 2, and I'll see you there.